The Vatican during the Renaissance was not just a church, it was a spy network, a weapons dealer, a poison factory, and a political empire, all wrapped inside the most sacred institution in the Western world, and most people have absolutely no idea. This video is about the hidden machinery running underneath the Renaissance papacy, the stuff that never made it into the official histories. You've probably heard that some popes were corrupt, but what we're about to go through is a completely different level, because the Vatican wasn't just bending the rules, it was engineering an entirely separate world behind the ceremonies and the gold. I've pulled together decades of research from diplomatic archives, art historians and Vatican scholars to bring you this, and by the end you're going to see the Renaissance church in a way you cannot unsee. Let's start with something hiding in plain sight. Right now, in the Vatican, there are frescoes painted by Pinturicchio inside the Borgia apartments, and most tourists walk through and see beautiful Renaissance art. But look closer at certain figures. Historians have argued for years that the face of the Virgin Mary in at least one of those panels is modelled on Lucrezia Borgia, Pope Alexander VI's own daughter, painted onto the Mother of God inside the Vatican itself. That's not decoration, that's a dynasty branding itself as divine. The Borgia apartments were psychological architecture. Every diplomat who walked those halls saw gold, celestial imagery, and heroic portraits designed to make the Borgia name feel sacred. It was propaganda disguised as worship, and Alexander VI understood something most rulers missed, that if you control the imagery, you control belief. But the visual manipulation was only one layer of the system, because beneath the art there was an intelligence network that would make modern spy agencies jealous. Okay, Renaissance popes discovered something extraordinary about the confessional taste. Priests hearing confession from nobles, merchants and diplomats were sitting inside the most powerful information gathering tool in Europe. Debts, affairs, betrayals, political schemes, all of it whispered in secret to men with direct lines back to Rome. Unlike formal spies, clergy crossed borders freely. Even during wars, multiple diplomatic records from Venice and Florence suggest certain confessors quietly relayed what they heard upward through church channels. The Vatican had plausible deniability built into the system by design. Spiritual authority and political surveillance became the same thing. Think about that for a second. Every noble who confessed a conspiracy may have accidentally handed that information directly to the Pope. But here's where it gets even darker. The Borgias kept poison specialists, contemporary ambassadors, repeatedly referenced something called cantarella, a compound possibly built around arsenic, as the Borgia family's preferred method of removing inconvenient people. The exact formula remains unknown because the records that might have confirmed it have a suspicious habit of disappearing. Vatican financial archives from controversial papacies show clear gaps immediately after power changed hands. Historians believe successive factions deliberately cleansed the records. So not only did they poison people, they erased the paper trail afterward. That's important. But the financial side of this story is just as jaw-dropping. Like, the Vatican financed wars using future indulgence revenue as collateral. Think about what that means. Like, believers across Europe were paying for spiritual salvation, and the papacy was using those projected earnings as security for military loans. Centuries before modern governments invented bond financing, Renaissance bankers treated indulgence income like securitized debt. The same document promising you a shorter time in purgatory was quietly backing an army somewhere in northern Italy. Salvation was a financial instrument, and when it came time to elect a new pope, the corruption got even more brazen. Venetian diplomatic archives contain suspiciously detailed expense records for conclave manipulation. Cardinals received bribes hidden inside food shipments, mule caravans, and so-called religious donations. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Alexander VI, allegedly distributed not just cash, but castles, bishoprics, and tax rights to swing votes. He was literally selling fragments of papal sovereignty to buy the papacy itself. Rome's streets during those elections looked like gang warfare. Noble factions deployed armed retainers to intimidate rival cardinals before the votes were cast. This is the same city that projected absolute divine authority to the rest of the world. Now, if you're finding this as fascinating as I am, stick with this channel. We go deep on the hidden histories that most people never get taught. Now, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because we haven't even talked about what Michelangelo left behind. When Julius II forced Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel, the artist was furious. He didn't want the job. He considered himself a sculptor, and some scholars believe he left a message inside the ceiling that has been staring down at popes for 500 years. In the image of St. Bartholomew, who was martyred by being skinned alive, the flayed skin hanging from the saint's hand contains what appears to be Michelangelo's own self-portrait, a man stripped of his skin, hanging in the most sacred room in Christendom, a quiet scream of resentment hidden in plain sight, commissioned by the very institution he resented. And Julius II, the Pope who commissioned it, reportedly delayed major decisions until his astrologers confirmed favourable dates. The same church that officially condemned astrology was using it to time military campaigns. Meanwhile, Pope Leo X, a Medici through and through, was treating the papacy like a luxury entertainment company. Exotic animals, theatrical banquets, musical performances. Rome was drifting toward financial collapse, and the Reformation was building pressure just outside the walls. Leo X reportedly said, upon becoming Pope, that now that God had given him the papacy, he intended to enjoy it, and he did. Right up until Martin Luther made that enjoyment impossible. The Vatican also feared the printing press almost immediately. Internal correspondence reveals real anxiety about uncontrolled theological replication decades before Protestantism exploded. They understood that once ideas could be copied at scale, the information monopoly was finished, but they couldn't stop it. The press spread faster than the church could respond. Here's what all of this adds up to. The Renaissance Vatican was operating on two completely separate tracks simultaneously. On the surface, sacred ceremonies, divine authority, moral instruction for all of Europe. Underneath, a continent-wide intelligence network built on confession, a financial system using salvation as collateral, poison specialists, archive destruction, electoral bribery, and art weaponized as propaganda. It wasn't simply a corrupt church, it was one of the most sophisticated political operations in European history, running under cover of religion. And the most remarkable part? Most of this was hiding in plain sight, in the frescoes, in the financial records, in a flayed skin hanging in the Sistine Chapel. In Venetian expense reports that were just a little too detailed. The Renaissance didn't just give us great art and philosophy, it gave us the blueprint for how power really works when it has no one to answer to. If you want to go deeper on the world behind the official history, there's a related video right here that I think you're going to love. And drop a comment below. Which of these details shocked you the most? The confessional spy network, the indulgence-backed war loans, or Michelangelo's hidden self-portrait? I read every single one. What makes this even more unsettling is how normalized this dual structure became inside Renaissance governance. Institutions rarely operate as a single coherent intention. They fracture into competing layers of survival, image management, and internal control. In that environment, theology and administration stopped being separate domains. Doctrine became infrastructure, ritual became governance, even artistic patronage functioned less like cultural investment and more like long-horizon messaging control, embedding authority into spaces that could outlast any single political crisis. The financial architecture alone reveals how far the system had drifted from its public moral framing. Church revenues were not simply collected, they were engineered through overlapping obligations, dispensations, and deferred spiritual accounting. Wealth moved through channels that resembled both taxation and credit markets, where absolution could function as liquidity and ecclesiastical favour operated as convertible trust. In such a system, corruption is too simple a word. It becomes indistinguishable from the system's native operating logic, where legitimacy itself is a tradable asset. Ultimately, what emerges from all of this is not a clean story of hidden plots or singular masterminds, but a portrait of an institution stretched across competing realities, spiritual authority on the surface, and political, financial, and informational pressures underneath. The Renaissance Vatican functioned as both symbol and system, shaping belief while also adapting to the practical demands of power in a rapidly changing world. Whether in art, governance, or emerging technology like print, it reveals how control is never purely explicit. It is distributed, encoded, and often maintained through structures that outlast the intentions of the people running them. If you want more on history and power, subscribe for more.